It is the 20th of May 1941, and the Luftwaffe is about to launch the first major airborne invasion in history over the island of Crete that will not only open up new kinds of warfare for the future, but also put an end to all major airborne landings for the German forces. So let's look into how this happened. The prelude to this massive airborne assault is quite complex. It leads us to a lesser focused part of the world for World War II. We are in the southern European territories, specifically Greece, and its major island of Crete, just to the south of the mainland. It was strategically well placed for both naval and airborne operations in the Mediterranean, and also gave the possibility to hit vital strategic assets such as the Romanian oil fields, so it was a huge threat to the Axis powers. It was a threat to their material supply chain and their strategic military bases, and this meant that it had to be captured at all costs and the Allies forced away from this vital position. Mainland Greece itself had already been captured in April 1941 with a combined German and Italian assault, after the Italians had failed to do so the first time. Unfortunately for the Italians, a running theme in World War II was for them to be unable to achieve much without German support, and with the fall of mainland Greece, the Allied forces, mainly British and Greek soldiers, were now massing at Crete, preparing to hold it against any attack, with air bases also being constructed and upgraded to give the Allied forces the ability to harass German operations for as long as the war lasted. The German command knew that Crete had to be seized quickly, especially before Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, began, so a speedy assault was necessary. So it was decided that a major airborne assault was the most effective way to do so. This favoured the German invaders as they had air superiority, so they could hit strategic and military targets quickly and cause chaos on the Allied defenders. Also, avoiding a risky naval-led landing, which would be difficult as the Royal Navy had a strong presence around the island still, and it was far more practical to pull off the airborne assault with the use of the elite paratroopers known as the Fallschirmjäger, who could tip the battle in the Germans' favour. This would also be the first major airborne assault in history, meaning defending from such an attack was difficult as it was a new type of warfare. And finally, the most important reason to me was that the Luftwaffe wanted to basically get its reputation back after it failed to destroy the Royal Air Force in the Battle of Britain. So this was mainly a reputation thing for them. Maybe an airborne assault was the best strategically, but a naval assault could have worked out with good supporting elements. But the Luftwaffe really wanted to get its respect back in the German military hierarchy. The defending garrison on Crete was no small force though. It comprised around 42,000 British and Commonwealth forces, these being around 14 to 15,000 British soldiers, around 7,700 New Zealand soldiers, around 6,500 Australian soldiers, around 9 to 10,000 Greek troops, including men from the regular army and some from the Cadet Military Academy. Also, many Cretan civilians actively participated in the resistance, often using improvised weapons. While their numbers are difficult to estimate accurately, many played a significant role in the defence of Crete and basically acted as a kind of guerrilla and irregular force that slowed the German forces down. Though the defending forces' numbers were quite large and actually larger than the German forces, their equipment was not ideal, with the Allied forces leaving most of the heavy weapons and anti-aircraft guns and artillery back on mainland Greece when they retreated. They also had very few tanks and armoured vehicles left. This left them basically with a large kind of light infantry force that had to dig in. They did have a few artillery pieces and tanks, but basically they were not as well equipped for the amount of troops available, and this meant the defending garrison was numerically superior, but weak equipment-wise, which is not ideal. And it also meant that due to the kind of large amount of elite forces coming, this did actually put the defenders at a disadvantage, even though the numbers were far larger. The invading forces, on the other hand, were quality over quantity, with the German forces that participated in the invasion of Crete consisting of about 22,000 to 23,000 troops, primarily airborne units with support from naval and mounting troops. The Fallschirmjäger, which were the German paratroopers, were around 8 to 9,000 paratroopers strong. They were initially deployed in the first wave, primarily targeting airfields and key positions across the island. They were then backed up by the Gebirgsjäger, which are the German elite mountain troops. After the paratroopers basically established control of the main airfield, which was Malemi Airfield, around 14,000 mountain troops were flown in to reinforce and to consolidate gains and push forward in ground combat. These troops were well-trained elite soldiers, equipped with the best equipment that the German infantry could be armed with. The air power supporting the paratroopers was substantial, with around 1,100 aircraft, this being comprised of around 280 bombers, 150 dive bombers, 180 fighters, 500 transports, plus 80 troop gliders. The plan was to overwhelm the Allied forces on Crete, and with total air superiority, to then turn the guns on the ground troops and eliminate them. And as we spoke, we literally had a jet fighter flying over, which is ironic and kind of cool. The Allied forces had one ace up their sleeve, though: the Allied Intelligence Network, which included everything from code breakers to spies, passing vital info to the Allied High Command. Thanks to this military intelligence, the Allies were actually aware of the upcoming invasion. With this knowledge, they were able to plan, with the limited resources available, to try and repel the invading forces. They did such things as repositioned AA guns, even telling some to hold fire while the initial paradrop happened and wait for the enemy close air support aircraft, which were a major threat to the airfield and its valuable key installations such as fuel storage and hangars. The Germans obviously were unaware of the enigma being cracked, still thinking that they had the element of surprise on their side, and this would obviously cause them much problems in the future. So the 20th of May arrived, and at 8 a.m. the Luftwaffe entered the Cretan airspace, and the operation, officially codenamed Mercury, had begun. With heavy bombing and the first wave of paratroopers beginning to land, with their main drop zones located around Malem Airfield in the west, Heraklion in the centre, and Rethmino to the east. But with the defenders being aware of the invasion, these positions had been reinforced, especially the airfield, with the paratroops landing zones being out in the open, with very little cover, and the fact that the German paratroopers landed with their primary weapons separate in most cases, with the weapons such as the Kar-98s and MG-34s being dropped in canisters that would have to be recovered once the troops made groundfall. This meant most paratroopers landed with only a pistol, knife, and their basic gear, with around only a quarter of the men being armed with a submachine gun, which was only effective in close range. This factor resulted in many paratroopers being killed before they could actually acquire their primary weapons, causing chaos. The Germans did manage to gain many footholds and secure their landing sites, but casualties were far higher than expected, and the vital airfield, which would needed to be captured so reinforcements and supplies could be flown in, was still in Allied hands, and now they were truly against the clock. And if they were not careful, they would be enveloped, surrounded, and destroyed by the Allied defending forces. May 21st and the Fallschirmjäger now focused the majority of their energy to taking Malem Airfield. This was priority one, and the defending forces knew this. So the battle raged, and both sides fought tooth and nail. But a key turning point in the battle was when the New Zealand forces defending a vital hill fell back due to miscommunication, allowing German forces to seize this. This resulted in the airfield being overrun and the Allied forces being pushed back. An Allied counterattack was organised and then began to assault the airfield with armoured support. It seemed it would be able to overrun the lightly armed German Fallschirmjäger, but thanks to the Luftwaffe providing superb close air support and the fact that the AA guns at the airfield were now knocked out, there were very little things to hold back the German air support. This resulted in the Allied forces being hammered and the counterattack being stopped and pushed back, allowing the Germans the chance to regroup, capture the airfield, and finally bring in the Gerberjägers and fresh supplies so they could advance further into the island. May 22nd, and the Germans began to mass their forces with reinforcements streaming in by air. They also attempted to land forces by sea, getting rather overconfident. Forgetting about the power of the Royal Navy, their supply convoy was ambushed, with Royal Navy ships annihilating the convoy. They did lose 3 destroyers, and this was mainly caused by German air forces as they now had air superiority over Crete. This attack, even though costly, did help delay more German troops and armoured vehicles getting to the island, allowing vital time for the defenders to regroup and reorganise. May 23rd, and now with increasing reinforcements built up, the Germans pushed east from Elam towards Chennai, and with intense fighting breaking out in mountainous terrain, both sides started to suffer heavy casualties. But it was now time for those elite Gerberjäger mountain troops to prove their worth and force the Allied troops from these vital high ground positions. As the ground battle raged on, the Luftwaffe was busy in the air, hitting key positions, attacking vehicles, and knocking out ships, making sure to stop the movement of reinforcements. They needed the enemy pinned in position so the ground forces could outflank and surround them. May 24th, and the key engagement was the attack on Castelli by the 95th Gerberjäger Pioneer Battalion. They advanced on the town with air support and were able to attack the lightly armed Greek defending troops there. These troops had very little ammunition and were unable to hold the town and had to retreat, allowing the Germans to seize it and also to free many captured German Fallschirmjäger troops who had been caught in the original airborne landings on the 20th of May. Then on May 25th, the German forces began to fortify and secure the coastal areas of the western part of Crete and some of the western inland areas of Crete, particularly the area around Malam, as the airfield was their primary supply route. They also began their eastward push towards Chania. The Allied defenders were now being pushed back and realised they may not be able to hold Crete. They focused the defensive positions around key positions near Suda Bay, leaving their access to a naval evacuation route available. As the defence of Crete looked more desperate by the day, the Allies began to panic, and now chaos started to reign in the high command, and the officers began to squabble. May 26th, and now the invasion was advancing with increasing pace, and the German morale was bolstered after the initial heavy casualties and failures at the drop sites. Now German forces continued their relentless advance, capturing Galatas and moving closer to Chania. But fierce resistance from the Greek civilian volunteers in guerrilla-style attacks still harassed and hampered their advance. But the main Allied forces were getting very nervous. There was very little chance of supplies or reinforcements being able to reach them, and the commanders of the Allied forces had to consider a full evacuation immediately, as fighting to the death would be of little value in the long run. May 27th, and Chania falls into German hands after intense close quarters fighting, and the Allied forces now began their evacuation, with any chance to hold the island being lost. It was a chaotic endeavour, with the Luftwaffe harassing and bombing Royal Navy ships as they loaded troops. It made the task difficult and far slower than it needed to be, and every second that they were delayed increased the risk of Suda Bay being overrun, and the rest of the Allied forces being trapped on Crete. Over the 28th and 29th of May, the evacuation was in full swing, with over 10,000 troops being saved by the Royal Navy. But as this happened, intense fighting to hold back the approaching Germans had begun. With the German forces now reinforced with their tanks, it became a brutal endeavour, and the lightly armed Allies were being smashed by the air forces as well. They had to dig in and make sure to have the Germans pay for every step they took towards the coast. The New Zealand troops showed exemplary bravery fighting during these battles, and also the Greek civilian population did amazing guerrilla attacks that harassed and slowed down the German forces. Keeping up this fight gave vital time for the Allies and allowed them to evacuate far more troops. But unfortunately for these Greek civilians, this would cost them dearly in the long run, with horrible reprisals by German forces as they occupied Crete. Over May 30th and 31st, the last stand had begun, with the Allied forces being positioned at Spakia, holding back the German forces for as long as they could. It allowed more troops to be evacuated, but eventually they began to buckle and they broke. But this action helped many soldiers evacuate and saved hundreds, if not thousands, of Allied soldiers' lives. And now the Allied forces were fully routed, and finally on the 1st of June the Germans declared victory, with 5,000 to 7,000 remaining Allied troops who could not retreat being captured. These men fought hard so their brothers in arms could get away to safely, a truly honourable endeavour. With the battle concluded, the casualties had to be counted, and it was high for both sides. But the Germans, who had thought this would be a swift and quick operation, were not happy with their casualties. Being killed were around 4,000 to 6,000, and wounded was 2,500 to around 3,000. These were also mainly Fallschirmjäger and elite Gerberjäger troops. These were very valuable soldiers to the German army and a big blow to future operations as they took a long time to train. They also lost a large amount of aircraft. Around 150 to 200 aircraft were destroyed or damaged, including many transport planes used for the airborne assault. The Allied forces, on the other hand, they didn't come away completely unscathed. They took around 3,500 to 4,000 killed or severely wounded. Around 17,000 Allied troops were captured by German forces after the surrender on June 1st, but the Allies did evacuate around 15,000 Allied soldiers, and they got away to Egypt thanks to the Royal Navy. Now, civilian losses for Crete is extremely difficult to know, and obviously some reprisals happened after the battle. It's most likely in the hundreds to low thousands, but the exact numbers aren't known. So it was, a pretty high casualty battle for both sides, especially given the kind of small size of Crete compared to some larger scale battles and the kind of swiftness of the engagement. So pretty brutal, I must say. These high casualties for the Germans and the failure to take the island as easily as planned made Hitler actually opposed to future airborne operation assaults, and saying, can't we just make these paratroopers fight on the ground? Whereas the Allied forces, after witnessing these landings, began to favour these high risk, high reward airborne assaults and actually put a fair amount of resources towards training, developing, and planning paratrooper tactics. The invasion of Crete was a high risk, high reward tactic for the Germans. They did achieve their objectives, but they paid a far higher price than they were actually willing to pay. And it was the Allies who have learnt a lot more lessons from Crete than the Germans. So even though, yes, it was a German victory in the long run, it actually did benefit the Allies more. Because without probably the major airborne invasions into Crete, you may never have seen things such as the major airborne invasions at D-Day or Operation Market Garden, because they most likely would have never been done to that scale. So it would have been smaller scale stuff. So Crete actually set the kind of groundwork for all future major airborne operations. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Try and be as accurate as possible. I may have got some things wrong, as I do, but hopefully I got more things right than wrong. Hopefully most things. And I hope you've learned some things about it and found it entertaining. Always appreciate a view. Leave a comment, leave a like, leave a subscribe. Don't get angry in the comments, guys. Try and be friendly and take it easy, everyone. You guys have a fantastic weekend.